Good morning and welcome to State of Central Jersey 2012. This is the fifth in a series of 12 events like this that we're doing around the state, covering every county and every region in the state. And we're delighted to be here at Raritan Valley Community College with our host, Casey. She'll be back later to join us for the discussion on education. For this discussion on the economy, I'm thrilled to be joined by Mark Krane, who's the Township Administrator in Warren Township. And Mark, you also head the Association of Township Administrators, correct?
I'm the current chairman of the Somerset County Managers Group.
Great. And to my right, Peter Palmer, Freeholder in Somerset County. And to my far right, Jack Ciattarelli, Assemblyman, 16th District. So thanks all so much for being here today. Assemblyman, we're going to start this off with you.
Very good.
Okay. We know that we live pretty fortunately, actually, here in Hunterdon and Somerset County in terms of the economy. We're blessed with the lowest unemployment in the state. Hunterdon is actually the lowest. We're the third lowest in the state. And yet, in a recent poll that was commissioned by Allstate Insurance, they noted that it was almost half and half in terms of nationally and New Jersey, respondents who said their financial situation is really pretty good, and the other half said, well, it's really not so good, or it's really, really pretty bad. So I guess it's kind of, is the glass half full or is it half empty here in Somerset and Hunterdon counties?
It's both. It's well known.
Answer.
I'm not up for election, so I didn't mean it to be a political answer. But it's well known in this region. We've got one of the most well-educated workforces in all of New Jersey, which is why the unemployment rate in this region has been less than the state average and the national average. And so the better educated you are, the less likely you have either been downsized or suffered a long-term unemployment. At the same time, there's a great many people in the region that also depend on industries that have been hardest hit by this economy. Construction. I mean, it is well known that over the past 10 to 15 years, Somerset County and Hunterdon County have had a great deal of employment driven by the real estate and construction business. And so while we don't have as many foreclosure situations in this part of the state as in other parts of the state, construction has slowed. And when construction slows, there's a great many sectors that are adversely affected by that. So that's why the answer is yes and no.
Okay, and Freeholder Palmer, you're right here in the ground in Somerset County. What do you see as you've been a freeholder for a long time, you know the county well, and you're responsible really for the county economy in terms of setting the agenda. Well, so far you've given us, what, a AAA bond rating for how many years now in Somerset County?
I've been on the board for, this is my 16th year, and we've had that the entire time and sometime before that, so I actually don't know how long it's been.
What's your sense of how people are doing in Central Jersey?
Well, I think the economy is improving. I think one of the barometers of that is retail sales, which seem to be increasing. And I think statewide, region-wide, and certainly of which Somerset County is a part, the governor's establishment of the Business Action Center, the Choose New Jersey organization, and his edict that they cooperate closely with the Economic Development Authority is responsible, is helping that happen. And I think that by his making the lieutenant governor responsible for overseeing this entire operation and demanding that the agencies, the state agencies work to help business development out, I think that's important. And as long as all of these pieces continue to work together, coordinate what they're doing, I believe that that this will the economic outlook will continue to improve. The biggest challenge to that is the, if you will, is the B team syndrome within agency. Each agency, what is the B team? B team is we be here before you come, we be here while you are here, and we be here after you're gone. And that's one of the, I think one of the problems with making particularly state government work.
Okay, and I know that, we know that perception is reality, and there's certainly the perception, there was, I think, a sense in the business community in New Jersey when this governor was elected that there was going to be a much more business-friendly administration, and that's certainly, I think the business in general certainly still feels that way. Mark, you're actually on the ground, so to speak. You deal with businesses who are coming in looking to get permits, new businesses setting up in Warren. Businesses are still coming into Warren Township?
Yes, businesses are still coming into Warren Township, but I'll use Warren and many Somerset County towns. This county for 25 years was a place to come. And you almost had to say, slow down, we can't take as much as was coming. But you've seen the attitude change countywide. And I'll use, you now have economic coordinators in towns like Hillsborough and Bridgewater, Franklin, Somerville, which people are now saying, Branchburg, Warren. You're now looking at things very differently than saying we're trying to, have control growth. We now don't have spaces that need to be built. We now have spaces that need to be occupied.
Was that a change in attitude, or is that a change that reflects the economy?
I think it's a change. It's a change in attitude as a result of the economy. It is Warren, for instance, spearheaded by new elected officials that we had on our board this year, brought to the full the governing body. And we passed an economic incentive ordinance, which is effectively a permit waiver ordinance. And we're waiving the first $5,000 of building permits for a business that's going to create 5 or more full-time equivalent jobs.
And has that actually been taken advantage of?
Not yet. It took effect July 1st. It is out there. We hope people taking advantage of it. We're also establishing a business advisory committee, which we've never had before. That committee will start meeting this month. And that reflects a change in attitude that business and the government need to change. We've done things in our downtown where we've beautified, we had islands that were put in during a road improvement, but we've beautified them. We've changed some property maintenance code requirements.
And as a resident of Warren Township, full disclosure, I should say that I appreciate all those things, and especially what you're doing to keep the tax rate down. Keep up the good work there.
But it reflects a change in perception by the governing body that we need to be welcoming, because vacancy rates of commercial buildings
and Warren
is significant in terms of potential exposure to the tax base.
Offices.
Yes, and you do not want to ride by and see vacant retail space.
And Warren is like many towns in Somerset County, where you've got a mix of large office complex, back offices for major organizations and institutions, and small mom and pop businesses. So you really have to accommodate everybody in that.
Yes, and one of the big issues, that I do think there has to be a conversation about, is the vacancy rates along the industrial corridors. The I-78 corridor, I-80 corridor. I mean, I-78 is a 25 to 30% vacancy rate. Mm-hmm. And that's really where I think you need, the state needs to assist the municipalities and the counties in looking at those large office complexes that were built, 30 to 40 years ago.
Well, the problem now is with many of those large office complexes, they can't compete with new office space.
And they're not flexible, and they're not green, and that's an area that Somerset County, all of us in Somerset County, need to address, because if not, we're going to have a problem down the road with that space.
And an even bigger problem, because really our state plan, the state development plan, is really encouraging business to relocate back to the cities, where we're not geared that way. So how are we going to deal with that in the years ahead?
I mean, the challenge is certainly to try to create a tide that lifts all boats. It's not going to be easy. I think what's very refreshing is to hear a municipal manager from a town be able to identify so perfectly what their greatest challenge is: vacancy rates in commercial buildings. Years ago, you didn't have that level of sophistication at the local level. The fact that you have that kind of sophistication, they've identified the challenge. Once you've identified the challenge, you can then start to work on solutions. Having said that, it's not going to be easy. I think we've come to the realization that sprawl only exacerbates the property tax crisis. We understand now that sprawl is inefficient, and that where you have a challenge in a place like Warren that has the 78 corridor and you have vacancy rates that are high in the commercial space, you have a renaissance taking place in downtown Somerville. Because all the data is showing that the next generation doesn't want to do what I did. buy the 1 acre lot in the suburbs with the 4,000 square foot home and pay X amount in property taxes and heat a house and air condition a house that in a short period of time, we go from a family of 6 to a family of 2. You see what's going up in downtown Somerville for a reason. All the trends indicate that the next generation wants to live in a place that has, if you will, a different kind of pulse than the suburbs.
We should identify what's happening in downtown Somerville. That's the mixed use, the retail, the housing right in the center of downtown Somerville.
And which is less car intensive. There isn't any place you can't walk to get all the necessities of life with the downtown Somerville plan. So it's very, very interesting. It's part of the challenge. When I-78 opened up, the suburbs like the Watchungs and the Warrens and the Bernards flourished because of the commercial buildings that went up along the corridor. And now what we're seeing is 20 or 30% vacancy rates there and this demand for housing in downtown Somerville, which when those suburbs were exploding, Somerville was experiencing probably its lowest point in its economic history.
So Peter, can we do this with every town? Is this going to be the new strategy in Somerset County?
Well, I'd just like to follow up on the topic that Mark and Jack just brought up. When I started getting involved in local politics, local government, late 60s, early 70s, I was concerned in Burtonsville, where I'm from, that we had 20 or 30 mega mansions from the pre-1930s, and I said that didn't seem to be usable anymore. You know, what are we going to do with these? This is a real challenge. Well, instead of 20 to 30, we probably, in Burtonsville, we probably have 300 McMansions. Somerset County has several thousand McMansions. And with the trend that my colleagues just brought up, question is, what is the future of 8,000 square foot plus mansions, McMansions in the 2 million plus range? With downsizing, urbanization, and so forth, what is the future of this real estate, which is such an important part of Somerset County's tax base and base period?
So if the trend is going to be for people to maybe sell those houses or try to sell those houses, move into the urban, such that we have urban areas in Somerset County, how does this...
Or elsewhere.
Or elsewhere, which is a real possibility, because everything is accessible. You know, nowadays everything's really close. What is Somerset County doing to deal with these challenges?
Well, the state strategic plan with which Somerset County participated in developing, identifying growth areas and conservation areas, we really have to emphasize our quality of life and opportunities that exist here, and we have a comprehensive economic development strategy, SEDS, which is become a fairly popular word, which we are working on to do this. Our Freeholder director, Pat Walsh, said SEDS sounds like a disease. I was thinking that if we could find a good synonym for development that begins with K, it could be CEKS, sex, which would at least attract people's attention.
A little more, yes. A little sexier, so to speak, yeah. One of the things that we deal with in Somerset County as well is that, you know, we're also facing changes in a major industry that's been part of us for so long. That's the pharmaceutical industry. In that, as the industry is going through consolidation, and Jack, your business is really based on, you do medical publishing based a lot on the pharmaceutical industry. You can speak to the changes in the industry.
And I wanted to keep my first answer short, to respect my colleagues, to your first question, but if you were to ask me the status of our economy here in this region, it's uneven. And the reason it's uneven is because the pharmaceutical industry is now a maturing industry. And I want to separate pharmaceutical from biotechnology. For example, you have a firm out in Mark's part of the county, Celgene, that is doing fantastic. That's a small biotechnology company. It doesn't compare in size just yet to the Sanofis or the Ortho McNeil Pharmaceuticals division of J&J or the Mercks. But those types of old standby pharmaceutical companies are going through a plateau, and which really has nothing to do with the national economy. It's just a function of their blockbuster drugs going off patent, and for the time being, a dry pipeline. So when you have an uneven economy in Somerset County because it's so dependent on pharma, the bad news is Sanofi moves out and we lose 4,000 to 5,000 jobs. The good news is Allergan's moving in. And we hope that 10 years from now, they've displaced those 4,000 jobs that we lost with Sanofi with 4,000 or 5,000 of their own. So the good news is this is still a very, very attractive region because of the labor pool that's here. And it's always getting better. This institution is very dynamic. I know Dr. Graybill is working on curricula that's now more industry-based. So it's not the old standby curriculum anymore. It's a curriculum that says, hey, industry says it needs these kind of employees in our region. Let's create a curriculum that's industry-based.
Which I think is a trend we're seeing in county colleges, community colleges across the state, is as people are turning, for economic reasons, we'll talk more about this next time, but the economic reasons and just the fact that the need is so much greater. And this is a great resource to meet those needs.
But I can't overemphasize enough that our greatest challenge over the next 30 to 40, 50 years is this. Just as over the past 30 to 40 or 50 years, we have pretty much ignored our cities. Since the riots of the 60s, we've ignored our cities in New Jersey. And the suburbs had call it a revitalization, a renewal, an explosion, call it what you want. I call it sprawl. But the trends are that cities are where people want to live the next 30 to 40 years. What does that mean for us? If we did what the cities did 30 or 40 years ago when that trend began and just kind of ignored it and didn't come up with a strategy, we're in trouble. The good news is we have a strategy in place here. We're working it. We're aware of the trends.
And that's really what we need the state to balance through the planning, recognize the issues in the suburban areas that developed over the last 30 years, as well as they want to, the people want to move to the cities. And, New Brunswick train station has been expanded. The county is introducing a bus program, I believe, to the businesses in Franklin from the New Brunswick train station. But what do you do with the areas, like a Warren, like a Watchung, that have no rail transportation, have no bus transportation? How do you get the people to those businesses? But if, as the Assemblyman said, if the state doesn't recognize and provide a balance, instead of encouraging businesses to move from Somerset County to the cities, we need to do both, or else we're going to have a serious problem in the next 10 years. Warren Township's assessed value from 2008 to from 10, actually, we dropped 14%. And we do an annual reassessment, as does a lot of towns in the county. So we have probably a pretty good handle on that because we're doing regular assessment in many of the towns. We saw about a 3.5% increase in the last 2 years, but commercials are not, not coming back yet. I mean, we do, you do smoke detector inspections every time a house is sold. And it's a fairly good gauge of sales.
How much activity there is.
So that we did about 150 to 160 inspections in 10 and 11, and we're over about 250 so far this year. It's telling you that there's a lot more movement. One of the mayor mentioned at our meeting last week that there's reports in the paper that the pipeline of houses in Warren Township, there isn't a significant number anymore.
Well,
we're starting to see a balance of that. And Warren's always been a little unique in terms of its real estate market. But
Well, the Warrens, the Bernardsvilles, those are still pretty high-end markets, and not really.
But we saw a blip, and you're starting to slowly see. It took 3 years to go down. We're beginning the end of the cycle of the 3 years where it's beginning to come back.
Are and I don't know what kind of marketing efforts you do. Certainly you talk to offices and companies who are considering moving into those office spaces in Warren Township. I mean, are you sensing, obviously it's a much harder sell than it used to be? Are you dealing with the commercial realtors? And what are they experiencing?
I think our change has been, and we will probably move through our business committee process to be a little bit more aggressive. We're a lot more, we're not going out and seeking. But to the extent that people want to come in and help, because one of the things I've noticed in the last 18 months is people are going into businesses that they don't have experience in.
Right.
They are not the people that have ever gone through a permit process, a development approval process, And like you did many years ago, they're trying something new because of the economy. And that's wonderful, but they need
It's a lot
more.
labor intensive for the people who are issuing the permits. You have a lot more work to do with
No,
them.
well, it's more educating. And I think it's something that on the, state, county, and municipal level, I mean, I've been advocating with the business partnership that they need to run training programs for architects, for engineers, for small business, to teach them, and I think, how to go through the process. It's complicated for those of us, the three of us on this panel that know what the process is,
Yeah.
let alone for somebody who does not.
You mentioned something before about transportation. Obviously, it's been a theme that's been running through this conversation. Peter, you've been active in transportation issues across the state for a long time. We've got difficulties, as the Assemblyman pointed out, now in Somerset County with no real public transit. What happens as things change and it becomes even more of an issue? How does it impact our economy? How does it affect lifestyle?
Well, there's much that needs to be done in the transportation field. It requires investments at all levels. I'd just like to, I'll get back to that, but I'd like to follow up on something that my colleagues have said the last few minutes. New York City is the sun in our economic solar system, and we're merely one of the planets. And our challenge is to make Somerset County the planet on which people want to live, work, play, invest, and travel. And I think that really has to be our objective. Going back to the New York City aspect, so getting there has got to be a strong priority, given the urbanization that's going on, and getting a one-seat ride on the Raritan Valley line and increased one-seat ride to Manhattan on the Gladstone branch are certainly priorities in that area.
Can I just put in a plug for increased parking? I mean,
Yeah,
you have the rails now, but there's nowhere to park unless you're a regular commuter, which doesn't encourage people to use public transit.
That's part of it. And there's a lot of transportation-oriented going on in Somerville, which was touched on earlier. Excuse me, what was your question that I said I'd get to?
Transportation. I mean, one of the things it's always seemed to me is that transportation already impacts our economy negatively in all of New Jersey, because it's just so time-consuming and so difficult to get anywhere. Assemblyman, you mentioned the sprawl, all those issues. If that's really had a negative impact on business, how do we deal with that as we become the population, the business population becomes even sparser in the suburbs, which means now instead of driving 20 minutes to meet someone, to go to a meeting, whatever, maybe you're going to drive 40 minutes, you're compounding the problems that already exist. How do we deal with that?
Well, transportation improvements mean a lot of money. And
But we're Somerset County. We're the 9th wealthiest county in the country.
well, we have a pretty aggressive capital program. One of the problems is that our only source of funds is the property tax, and either through direct capital expenditures or bonding, anything that we do, and I think we comparatively have a pretty aggressive transportation issue. We've got the most bridges of any county in the state of New Jersey. They're very expensive, and you've got to maintain what you've got. I think one of the things you find in transportation in a lot of other areas is that you have every level of government wants some other level of government to pay for what they want. The municipalities want the county wants the state wants the counties or the municipalities or the federal government to pay for anything. Whatever we want has got to be paid for someplace, and taxes are, I don't have to tell anybody here what the general attitude is towards paying taxes is, but money's got to come from someplace, and each of our levels of government's got to be willing to step up and pay for what it wants.
So Assemblyman, not to inject politics into this whole discussion, but every one of the legislature and its legislature is up next year, the Assembly, right?
Everybody.
Everybody, Senate and the governor, gubernatorial election. So how do you balance all of these things and really focus on investment in the state? You know, we've got the public, the higher education bond issue this year, which is the first time in, 40-some years we've actually been asked to pay money for higher education. How do we deal with the need for investment in what we've got with all these competing interests?
Well, the best way to deal with investment is with the proper long-term planning. It's something Somerset County's always been very, very good at. It's certainly something Warren County's always been good with. There's nothing wrong with debt. Debt is a lot like I don't have a solar system analogy, but I'll use the fire analogy. Fire can be an incredibly powerful tool, but could also really hurt you if you don't use it carefully. So debt is a critically important tool for the infrastructural improvements that we need and the investments we need, as long as it's used wisely. And the fact of the matter is, this is the first debt financing for the expansion of the public colleges, universities in a very, very long time. It's long overdue. The good news is it's here. The bad news is it's not nearly as much as we've done in the past because we haven't done good long-term plan in the state and we don't have a whole lot of bonding capacity. So, listen, dare I say that transportation over the next 30 to 40 to 50 years will be less of an issue in the suburbs. Because if you take a look at our student enrollments in the public school systems, it's not a hockey stick, but what you're seeing is a downward trend. And it's because a lot of us who are now the baby boomers are becoming empty nesters. Right. And so, you know, I had a group in my legislative office recently lobbying me to advocate for a new line that would connect the western parts of Hunterdon County via train to Newark so people can get into New York City. With limited dollars, I can't advocate for that project. And it's not because I'm not an infrastructure guy, it's not because I'm not a transportation guy, but you have to convince me that over the next 20 to 30, 40 years, the next generation wants to live 2.5 hours from New York City, if that's where we're trying to get people.
But aren't we almost guaranteeing creating a future, though, where we know that's not going to happen if the transportation isn't there?
Even if the transportation is there, I don't think that is still a quality of life issue. It's like when the governor canceled the ARC project. I have 3 people that live in my West Ridge development, which is on the western fringe of Hillsborough Township. And three gentlemen in my neighborhood who go into New York City every day said, Jack, listen, I'm not all that heartbroken. The governor would have taken a half hour off my commute. Great. But my commute is now 1.5 hours, 3 hours each day instead of 4 hours each day. Still not the greatest quality of life. And so what I suggest is we take the $3 billion that New Jersey was going to spend on the ARC tunnel, revitalize our cities, and cut people's commute to maybe 45 minutes to work in New Jersey cities.
It's interesting how, you know, what you see depends on where you sit. We just did Hudson County and Union County earlier this week, and the canceling of the tunnel project, I mean, they're bleeding jobs, and they're really convinced that the construction jobs that would have come from that tunnel have had just a disastrous impact on their economies.
New Jersey's jobs future and New Jersey's long-term prosperity, in my opinion, is very much dependent on redevelopment, like you're seeing in downtown Somerville, and the revitalization of our cities. And I don't mean to be too much of a paradox. What's up with this guy? He represents the suburbs, but he's advocating for the cities. But I need to tell you, if you take a look at the state budget and what % of the state budget goes towards helping cities, it's also the answer to our property tax crisis.
And that's really long-term. If our cities don't succeed, we're not going to succeed as a state. Right?
Right. I mean, when people ask me to solve the property tax crisis, what I say is you need to give me a little leeway and you need to be flexible in supporting our cities. If we don't revitalize our cities, a significant portion of our state budget will continue to support only those in the cities. I represent the Princetons in my legislative district. If you aggregate the total income taxes withheld from Princeton residents, it's $115 million. They only get $23 million back to support their public schools. Hillsborough pays more than $50 million in income taxes to the state from its citizens, aggregately. We get back only $24 million.
So Peter, from your perspective in the county and your transportation interests, you know, you've heard what the Assemblyman just said is the future here. You know, how do we deal with this in Somerset County?
Well, Jack and I have never shrunk from disagreeing with one another. Going back to what I said earlier is that New York City is the sun in our economic solar system, and increased transportation between New Jersey and Manhattan is critically important to both Manhattan and to New Jersey. I think whichever design for the new rail tunnels into Manhattan is chosen, it's got to be one of them. This connection, I think, is just critically important and well worth the investment. I think you could probably, when Midtown Direct Service was introduced on the Morrison-Essex line, the increase in residential real estate values in that in the area served by that line, probably in addition to whatever was going on globally, that increase in value was practically the cost of building the tunnel, so that generally increased investment in transportation is well worth it, and which is another thing. I think the general public does not differentiate between spending and investing when it comes to public sector projects. I think that's very unfortunate. I think $1 billion a year is the same as $1 billion investment, which it isn't. And I think making that differentiation is very important.
And Mark, from your perspective, Warren is not on a transit line, but certainly how many people depend on public transportation to work in a city?
There is absolutely there's no bus that goes into Warren Township. If you want to take mass transportation, you've got to go into Berners Township, where there's a train line and a bus line that runs through there, or you got to go down to Denellen. Or Boundbrook. We don't have, and that's one of the comments I made earlier. There needs to be a recognition of some level of public transportation. We tried to push a few years ago and work with Rodwise and work with the county planning board as well as the NJDOT to try to see if we can get a park and ride in Warren Township. They don't want to come into Warren Township, and one of the suggestions was a location that's actually in Basking Ridge. Well, why would Warren, my comment at the time was, why would Warren ever be involved in sponsoring a site in Basking Ridge? So it's important that the transportation of any type be expanded into those areas. And while I don't have, I know what New Brunswick looked like, 40 years ago, and right. I know what it looks like today. Warren was involved through RCAs in the 80s, and gave a significant amount of money to the city. And we know that a lot of that money helped start the drive of that community to move into the direction that it is today. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, obviously, as officials in Somerset County, I think it's incumbent upon us to recognize the suburban issues, and the hand we're dealt, because if we don't recognize that, I think the communities in the county government and the municipal governments that aren't served by those transportations, and I'm accepting out the phenomenal changes in Somerville and the things that the Boundbrook officials, and North Plainfield officials that are on those lines are trying to do. The other thing I think it's important to understand is that the communities in this county have been very smart in how they've managed their money. County government, many of the municipal governments. You talk about, we're not in a lot. We're not in a lot of these fiscal crises, and we're able to deal with these economic issues because over a very long period of time, people have been smart about how they've managed their money.
Prudent. Yeah.
And so that have tried to do things on a very cost-effective basis and creative about things before it was popular to be creative.
Mm-hmm. And now we're in a situation where clearly that's paying off, as you say. And we've just got a few minutes left on this, so I'm going to ask each of you to do a kind of a lightning round of questions here. If you could characterize what you think has had the biggest positive impact on this county's economy in the past year, and also what's had the most negative impact on the economy in Somerset and Hunterdon counties in the past year. Mark, what would you say has been the biggest positive impact, and what would you say has had the most negative impact?
I think the negative impact is just dealing with the national issues of the economy and recognizing that they're out there. And I think that's the negatives are sort of built in and are natural. The positives, though, are the recognition of it, and the fact that that towns like Warren and other towns in this county are saying we now need to take actions like our economic incentive ordinance in Warren, business committees, other towns' economic coordinators, as I've said earlier, and demonstrate to the businesses that we're here, we want you, and saying to our residents at the same time, we don't want vacancy signs because it's not good for the residents, it's not good for the business community.
Not good for the town. So the silver lining in the cloud would be the fact that everyone's being much more proactive now to deal with it, with the economic crisis.
Let's be important about one thing. So, this county is not dealing with issues like many other places are.
Right.
I mean, it's, I think that's a silver lining in and of itself. You don't have some of the crises, and obviously, Jack and Peter are in places that I'm not necessarily in. But
we should point out, that's a good point too, and with the Alice report that the United Way just released recently, which is Alice is asset limited, income constrained, but employed, people who still have their jobs. But they estimated, I think it's about the same in Somerset and Hunterdon, almost a third of the population in both those counties is really in real financial difficulty. So clearly there's a part of Somerset and Hunterdon both that's maybe not up here today, but there are people facing some severe financial difficulty. And we just maybe, are we seeing them? Are we finding them?
Well, you mentioned a statistic before that is perfectly accurate, that the two counties are always like in the top 5 or 7 in terms on a per capita basis. But it's a bit misleading only in this sense. If you remove the top 1 or 2% of the wage earners in both counties, we are no longer anywhere near the top 5 or 7%. The fact is you have some people in this region who are big earners. I'm talking about folks that earn $20, $30 million a year. And it skews it. So to your point, there are a lot of people that are in that Alice, the category you speak of. Your question was the biggest negative, the biggest positive. The biggest negative, and this is no criticism whatsoever of Sanofi, but the biggest blow to the county was Sanofi having to close its facility, its R&D in Bridgewater. The best news is Allergan moving in, and the fact that we've got an extremely well-educated labor force here in this region. And it's why you haven't seen the foreclosures that you've seen in other parts of the state and around the nation, and why you haven't seen the unemployment rate in this area as you have in other parts of the nation.
And Peter, what's your biggest positive?
Not too much to add. The positive is the awareness, as Mark pointed out, and working with the efforts on the state basis. The negative is falling short of that. That if we don't get on the with the state strategic plan, or if it doesn't, if it falters somehow, that's the negative. I'd like to add one thing that hasn't come up yet. The whole national issue, of course, is creating jobs. I just learned in my preparation for this that one of the things that's been brought up by a number of particularly smaller companies is the fact that there are a lot of state incentives for creating jobs, but that has not been communicated to smaller business, that they're just not aware of what the incentives are or how to access them.
That's a great point. So, last question for all of you. Let's go by and just, if you could have one thing happen, regardless of wave a magic wand, what one thing would you like to see happen that would have the biggest positive impact on the economy. And you could throw in a last closing comment at this point too. Mark, what would be the, just if you could make anything happen, what would that be? From the county or from the state or from the federal government?
Well, clearly what I'd like to see more of is more cooperation with the state level, because the county cooperation, I think overall is very good. To work with the municipalities and the counties to deal, as I've been saying throughout this discussion, with that urban-suburban balance, and have incentive plans. Roche, as an example, was we're working with Choose New Jersey. Somerset County was very active, as was the business partnership, in submitting an RFP of different options in Somerset County. They're, as I understand it, going to New Brunswick.
Well, New York.
They're going to New York.
City.
Well, New York, but there's an
New
element.
Brunswick was
but there's
also in the
and there's
competition.
an element. You're right, and there is an element there too. But it wasn't that the Somerset County was not a player in that, where, as Jack said before, pharmaceuticals are history. So what I'd like to see is, through the NJEDA, through the lieutenant governor's office, that we're recognized as what we are, the services and the quality of life that we can offer, and an incentive program is put in place to assist us down for the next 10 to 20 years.
Okay. Peter?
Well, of course, I push for transportation investment. Another thing, if there was one thing that could happen, the move for particularly research in pharmaceuticals and other research is to Cambridge, Massachusetts, because of the presence, not necessarily of Harvard, but of MIT. If we could get a combination of New Jersey universities, Rutgers, Princeton, NJIT, to put together, start to develop something that could turn into that kind of a innovation center, I think that would be a great thing.
I've always felt strongly that the one issue that touches each and every resident of the state, whether they're a renter or a homeowner, and each and every business in the state, whether they own the building in which they operate or they rent space in the building in which they operate, is property taxes. And so what we need is a long-term game plan that won't just limit. The 2% cap is a magnificent tool and a magnificent reform, but let's not forget, all it does is minimize future increases in something that everyone agrees is already too high.
Not a long-term solution.
Well, it is if we do nothing else, and it's a magnificent tool. But there are ways to lower property taxes, and city, county, and state need to work together to make that happen. And you need all three parties to have a certain fortitude and willingness and sacrifice to make that happen.
And I think we've seen from this discussion here today that I think there is a lot of cooperation and information sharing among all three levels of government here, which, as we move from county to county in this series, we're noticing that that's really a hallmark of what makes a county successful, is the level of cooperation, the information that's shared among everyone. So,
Just what Jack said, property taxes, yes. But let's keep in mind that by far the biggest piece of that is how do you fund public education? That's the 800-pound gorilla in the room.
That's why I wasn't specific. When I say a long-term plan, the property taxes, I'm talking about municipal taxes, county taxes, and school taxes. And there's room for efficiencies in all three areas.
and you're all invited to stay for our next discussion on education. So thank you all for being here this morning and for contributing to this section on the economy. Thanks very much.